Have you ever seen a member of your team who's gotten to the point in their job where they just don't care anymore? Not how much effort they put in, not how their leaders or colleagues act or might possibly discipline or encourage them in any way, how successful things are or aren't. They've just gotten to a point where apathy is what they lean into. It happens far more than we want to admit. So what do we do about it? Our guest today has some ideas on that, not only for apathetic employees, but for us as leaders who may be headed in that direction. Hold on. I'm Russel. Welcome to Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. I am a communications nerd. Love communications, love the interaction, love the two-wayness that it needs to be effective. I love leadership. I'm a leadership nerd. I love creating new leaders. I love the idea behind it. I love looking at the challenges and how we can sort of look as leaders of how we can have the most influence and where we can learn from it. All of this is melded together and conjoined with my curiosity. Much like you, I'm curious about how we can make the workplace a better place. This show, it's a great place to start. Another great resource you may not have checked out recently is our weekly Raw Notes. Raw, that's R, the @W, which is short for Relationships at Work, is a regular short note that I pass along to your inbox with a thought, a resource, and the latest content from our show. It's actually the inspiration I used for the Thursday mini episodes. Only the mini episodes are months behind the Raw Note itself, so if you want to catch up and keep up, you have to subscribe. Just head on over to relationshipsatwork.ca, Canada, don't you know? At the top, you'll see the link for free employee interviews. Just click on that, get the free tool, and sign up for the next Raw Note. It's all free, doesn't cost you a thing. It's all really quick, and all a way to think a little more differently in how we can make the workplace one we love for us and our organization. Speaking of love, or even like, that's not necessarily what all employees and leaders feel after a while in their roles. Sometimes they just don't even care anymore. Indifference, employee apathy, it just can creep in. It happens. But what do we do? What do we don't do? That's the bigger issue. I read not too long ago from a former guest, Jeff Toyster. If you're not following him on LinkedIn, really suggest you do. He's talking about the problem for organizations not being employee engagement and targeting that. It's the fact that we actually don't focus on disengagement. I can't tell you how spot on this is. Hell, I did a Raw Note and I did a mini episode podcast on this very topic. Organizations don't have a disengagement strategy. They focus far too much on pizza parties or what can we do in this moment to make employees happy after maybe a quick survey or something. That's great. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but what could be equally as important or even more important is look at what's making them unhappy and fix that. No one starts a job disengaged and apathetic. That is fostered and nurtured in them over time when they see the environment, the culture, the leadership around them not looking at the problems they're seeing day in and day out. My guest today has been working with employees for years, mostly in call centers, but the challenges are the same for all employees. And he has some great ideas on how we can understand apathy, sort of some of the warning signs, so we can start being proactive. We can lead as leaders to take action against it, even sometimes for ourselves. Because this challenge will happen for all of us eventually. If you haven't come across an apathetic employee or an apathetic leader yet, you will. So what do we do? Well, that is why we're going to go over to Justin. Hold on. And on the show today, we have Justin Robbins, and here is why he is awesome. He is a keynote speaker, founder, and principal analyst at Metric Sherpa, an independent research and advisory firm helping customer experience professionals. He's an advisory board member of the CX Accelerator, That's community supporting the customer experience. He's a member of the board of advisors for Quality Assurance and Training Connection to help and educate those in contact centers. And he's a certified business associate for ICMI, designing and delivering courses for the International Customer Management Institute. Hi, Justin.
Hey,
That's
Russell.
a lot. So happy to have you here. It has been, we were just talking before the show started. It's been a while. I was just thinking, it has been, when was Talk Desk? That was 2018?
Yeah. It's been 5 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. It's been a while. It's great to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
But I'm not letting you off the hot seat though, which is the first question I have to ask all of my guests, because I do. What is your best or worst employee experience, Justin?
I'll make this easy. The worst is just going to be the opposite of what I'm going to talk about with the best. Russell, so there are a lot of things that flash through my head, and the time that comes to me first is during my experience at Hershey, and there were, I think, 3 things about my time at Hershey that makes that my best employee experience. The first was being supported and a part of a team of not just one great leader, but multiple great leaders. And these are people who were well-intentioned, well invested in their employees, well kind of invested in their peers. You knew with your interactions that you were surrounded by just a group of genuinely good people. That was kind of the first defining moment for me. The second, though, Russell, is I actually think and look back at things that at the time I probably minimized their significance, and it was opportunities to go and get certified as a facilitator for 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was being part of lunches where we were looking at the 4 generations that we had in the workforce at that time and understanding what they meant for us as leaders and as employees. And all of these things that happened that were investments in us, not just as employees of a company, but really as people and as future leaders outside of an organization, and how those would be transferable and enable us to be successful at their places. All of that for me, honestly, I think has shaped me in just so many ways and instilled so many values and things that have become incredibly important for me as I've been leading and working with employees since that time. That stands out to me in terms of the best. The third thing, I know I said 3 things about it. The third was just the values of the organization, the core values of the organization, and how there was an intentional effort of making sure that employees understood and embodied them in meaningful ways. It wasn't just hey, here's a poster of the things we care about, but it was like, Russell, here's how we make this real for you so that you give a shit and you actually do something about it, right? That to me was what was just amazing about the experience.
I love that. And I want to ask a quick question about the values though, because totally agree. It's on the website, it's on the poster, so it must mean something. But when it came to your experience, how did they actually embody the lip service that we usually get about values versus the practice of values? Like, was it in their hiring? Was it in their, like, what did it look like?
Yeah. So I would say it showed up everywhere. It was part of the hiring process, part of the new hire orientation, of which I was one of our ambassadors. And so we would talk about the culture of the organization, what we were trying to do. But to me, the most effective mechanism that we put into place while I was there that is still being used by the organization today is something called legacy checks. And legacy checks was an on-the-spot recognition program. And what it was is every manager above had what was almost like a checkbook that had a spot for the employee's name, the date, and then it had these 4 core values: own, anticipate, delight, and inspire. And then it had spot for me to write what I observed. So for example, we had an amusement park there. And if I was in the park with my family and Russell, you worked at the amusement park and I saw you go out of your way to do something for a guest of the park or something, I could there in that moment write you a legacy check and say, hey, Russell, what you did is you anticipated this guest need by doing this, this, and this. And then there were 3 copies of that check. One I gave to you right away. One got sent to your manager so that they knew, hey, Russel was recognized for doing this amazing thing. And this third one was actually redeemable. So because we have all these parts of the Hershey destination, they were kind of incremental value. The first time you got one, it was $5. The second time was $10, then $15, then $20, and then would recycle. And you could use this for dining out, for park tickets, for spa, for a hockey game, right? All of these types of things. And I mean, the results spoke for themselves, and the investment, I would say, was well worth it. But here you systematized handwritten on the spot recognition, which is tied to multiple motivating factors. There was a monetary element. I saw in my office in particular, we had these pillars where managers would tape all of the legacy checks their employees got. And so somebody would say, hey, Russel, I saw you got this legacy check for doing this thing. Like, that's amazing. Go you. And it was all based off of these core values. So it wasn't a post, like it was lived out every single day. And there was very clear connection between the work that you did and the bigger kind of focus of the organization you were a part of.
That's fantastic. I also love that it reinforces that leaders need to recognize what the values are to reward them. So that also digs into the whole situational awareness thing where it can't be about you. You have to be watching the environment you're supposed to be perpetuating as a leader. I love that.
Yeah.
Today is another direction than that unbelievably good story. We're talking about apathy today. And I did my Google dictionary, which is basically lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. Now, that's all well and good. Those are 3 words that we want to avoid. But I'm interested more in what that actually looks like in order to combat it. What does it feel like? How do you understand and see apathy, Justin?
Yeah. Russell, I have so this is just kind of an interesting observation that I've made and kind of anecdotal from conversations I've had with leaders who have become maybe callous and believe that they made a bad decision when they've hired someone, and they've hired someone who is giving those attributes of apathy. And one thing that I'm an eternal optimist, and I have to believe, Russell, that by and large, the human population is not like built with a predisposition to be apathetic. In fact, I think we're the opposite, and apathy manifests and shows itself when there starts to be gaps between what we had hoped and expected and been promised and the reality that we find ourselves in front of. That's when we grow in disinterest and discontent and frustration and all of those things. So for me, like when I think about like at its root, what drives apathy, it's a person who believed that they were going to be in one set of circumstances or equipped with one set of resources or going after one set of problems, and then their reality begins to become a stark contrast of that. That to me at its root, I believe, is what causes a lot of apathy to show up.
So it's the promise is not delivered. It's the we're going to help you, but we're not. But the delivery of it doesn't work. This has always been worrying of me, of this gap between words said and actions taken, which generally happens around the onboarding process, which is this: here's the experience you're going to have. Whoops. Is that where you see it the most?
Yeah. So let's talk about an interesting, because to me, when I talk to people about this, Russell, I often talk about the difference between what are things that are drivers of employee satisfaction and what are things that are drivers of employee engagement. And when we think about some of the things that drive employee satisfaction, particularly around the onboarding process and starting a new job, I expect a few things. I expect you're going to pay me the amount of money that you said you're going to pay me. You're going to provide the benefits you said you'd provide. I'd work the hours that you said I would work. And so those are very clearly documented, right? I am signing an agreement that it says those are terms of our employment. There are 2 other really important drivers of employee satisfaction and contributors to apathy that are assumed but not signed on the dotted line. One of those is the leader that I'll be working with, and the second is the tools and resources that I'll have available to do my job. And from a leader standpoint, we can start to get a pretty good understanding of that leader through the interview process. We can look at websites like Glassdoor to get a sense of some of the leaders. We may even know people that work for that organization and can get a sense. So so in that, we've got a number of things to understand the leader. And of course, people can put on a front and change and whatnot. The thing that's not talked about that I see as a core driver of apathy is I'm going into a job and I believe that I'm going to have the tools and resources that I need. And at no part of the interview process are we transparent and maybe say, hey, Russell, by the way, we're going to give you a number of tools to do your job, but we've got this one system that it causes a lot of frustration for people who are going to do what you do because it takes a lot of time, or there's a number of bugs and there's a number of workarounds. And what I believe we've subconsciously convinced ourselves is if we don't disclose that to people, right? We're worried that if we share that with them, they're not going to join the organization. They're going to be like, well, I don't want to be part of an organization that does that. So instead, we avoid the topic, or we may even lie about it, and then employee joins and they find out, wait, the tools I have to do, like, they suck. They don't do what they're supposed to do. And this now, even with the best managers, can erode the employee's ability to do their job. So that to me, more than anything, is part of the onboarding process, is this element of, again, and I look at the research I've done, and it's people leave jobs for two primary reasons. It's their boss, or it's they don't have the tools and resources. And I believe that if we're more transparent and vulnerable and just factual about understanding, hey, this is what we have available today, and we recognize where there are challenges, but I want you to hear loud and clear that me as your leader, I'm going to support you. I'm here to make sure that you're successful, right? Rather than now I'm trying to backtrack on, yeah, I guess I should have told you that. Some things are janky around here.
Keywords get thrown around a lot, those buzzwords. So I just want to make sure, are we differentiating apathy between disengagement and quiet quitting? I just want to make sure that what we're talking about, is it the same thing? Is this a semantics exercise?
Yeah. So let's talk about quiet quitting for a minute, because there was a Harvard Business Review article I read from I want to say it was 72, and it talked a lot about psychological absence. You know what psychological absence looks exactly like, Russell?
Tell me,
quiet
Justin.
Quitting. It's this fundamental problem of how do we erode trust and credibility and interest as a result of what we do or do not do, say or do not say. And so when I think about disengagement, engagement for me is my willingness to exert discretionary effort. And we have certainly seen people who are dissatisfied in their job that are willing to exert discretionary effort, right? It's people who may not be happy with the amount of money that they make, but they believe in the mission, and so they want to be a part of the cause. I may be apathetic about my boss or about how I'm being resourced, but I may still want to see the organization win. And this can create an interesting set of challenges for it. To me, can you see someone who is apathetic and disengaged, and then, yeah, they're going through the motions? So I think by nature, that is the definition of psychological absence or quiet quitting. But to me, they're not necessarily one and the same, but I think they can absolutely have influence on the other.
What is a leader's role in this, in addressing apathy and with influencing apathy? It sounds like very much it's a transparency problem. But when it comes to fixing the problem, what is a leader's role?
Once you get to the place of somebody being apathetic, it's a difficult road from there. So I think the leader's role, first and foremost, is recognizing the early warning signs of apathy and having a proactive mechanism to. It's not just about transparency, but to me, it's about communication. It's about engagement. I think one of the common things that organizations, have in place today are exit interviews, which are, I don't have necessarily a reason to be honest. I don't even necessarily have a reason to show up. There's not a lot of incentive for me as the departing employee. And I may not even believe at this point anything's going to be done with the information. I think there's a lot that can be done, and some people classify them as stay interviews. For me, it's just, what is our consistent cadence of communication with our people? It might be one-on-ones. It might be quarterly chats at a coffee shop. It might be focus groups. But how are we taking our team and creating an environment where they feel like they can tell us what we should start, stop, and continue as a business? How are we giving people an active voice in influencing the decisions that we're making, right? Just because we ask an employee for their opinion on how we should change a process doesn't mean we have to change the process. But that, even just that act of saying, Russell, like, it is clear to me as your leader that this is causing a lot of problems for us. And I don't know that I have the perfect solution. I don't know that any of us do, but I think if we come together, we can get something that's better than what we have today. I think it's that type of posture and that type of engagement early and often that will get you to a place where if you have apathetic employees at that point, there's probably something else going on outside of your influence that is driving that. And those can be factors outside of work that, right? There can be all sorts of things that now are showing up as discontent that you've done all you've been able to do at that point.
I love that you tapped onto that, because a lot of leaders don't understand the ecosystem of what their employees are working within. And I don't mean the workplace culture. I mean home life. I mean family life. I mean, there's a lot that can influence that apathy. But you've touched on it real quickly. What are some of the warning signs that leaders can look for that their employees might be going down the path of apathy?
One for me is, and I'm going to use a lot of my examples, and Russell, as you know, but for those who don't, so most of my work is done with customer service teams or with contact center organizations, and there are small signs of neglect that start to show up for me in the early phases of apathy, and those small signs of neglect can be extra time on break. It's starting to show up as tardiness. It's starting to show up as someone who was performing really well in some areas now starts to trend downward. And based off of the nature of many jobs, it's often attributed to, oh, well, we've just went through this change, or we just deployed this new system, or we just launched a new process, or, and we don't actually engage the employee. And I don't know why this is, but right, so often leaders will not engage the employee in an honest conversation and say, Russell, like, how are you feeling? Like, what's going on? I'm like, something's happening here, because we've got a lot on our plates. We've got a lot of things fighting for our attention. And I think it's easy to let those small things slip and assume that they're not there. So those kind of small signs of neglect, I think, are one for me. The second, which can be a little bit harder, depending on, again, this depends on how you're engaged with your people, but there's always alive and well a gossip kind of undertone and murmur happening within your organization. And I think starting to see what employees maybe previously weren't buying into some of these things or weren't engaging some of these things, and now starting to, even if they're not feeding into it, are starting to engage with it. This to me, those are signs of dissent that are starting to show up as well. I think the last part of it is, really just watching for, are they just going through the motions? To that idea of quiet quitting, depending on the nature of your work and how much opportunity you have to see your employees in their element, are you noticing that the things they once got excited about, that they once cared about, isn't the case anymore? And those things can sneak up on us. But again, I think the more that we're in tune to that and are aware of it, the better our chances are of being able to do something about it before we get to that point of Russell, I guess the way I always put it is if I have an employee resign from my organization, it should never be a surprise, right? It should never be a surprise. Even if they're going to another organization, if I'm a really good manager, I may have even been part of the conversation with that employee of helping them understand why that next move is right for them, because being someone who probably knows their performance better than anybody else. right? So that to me is, if you are having people quit your organization today and it's coming as a surprise to you, then you are missing the signs. That I think is the biggest piece of it.
How do you motivate a team or a colleague through apathy? You've done the surveys, you've got the information, you've seen the warning signs. So what are the mechanisms you may need to put into place to combat this?
So you mentioned the survey, and based off of my research with frontline employees, like in general, people really don't believe or buy in or care about the survey. Right? For a lot of reasons, it seems like it's not in the best interest, and very rarely is it clearly shared what was learned, what's being done or not done as a result, and how that affects me. And so I think the communication around it is really important. So, take that as a nugget, like, hey, if I've done the survey, what's one of the things to do? First is to very clearly communicate with people, like before and after the survey, what's being used, how's it being used, what's understood, what's not understood, all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but again, Russell, to me, the biggest mechanism in working against apathy is the coaching conversation. It's not a company-wide campaign. It's not a series of classes. It is a one-to-one relationship. Like that is it all day, every day. You've done the survey, if you've seen the warning signs and you're trying to like overcome the hump in apathy, you've got to invest in one-to-one relationships with your people. That is the only way. That really is it to me. Are you willing to invest consistently in those one-to-one relationships? Because if you're not, then just expect it to continue to be a problem.
Maybe let's actually talk about what a coaching conversation would look like here, because my biggest problem or challenge with this is leaders being asked to do this and not having the skill set or the tools to do it, because so many people are put in leadership positions that have no leadership skills. Not their fault. They just have never had, maybe they're not comfortable in conflict conversations. Maybe they're in 117 meetings that day and just aren't able to prioritize it. So I'm not saying like, let's go through 17 coaching models, but what is sort of one that you think would be most effective? Because consistency is key here. And to be able to do one coaching session and they go, I fixed apathy. That's not how the way the world works. Apathy is an ebb and a flow if you're not consistent about it. So what is, maybe just walk me through one particular coaching model you like that you think would work best?
Yeah. So to your point, Russell, if you think about how most people who have never been taught how to coach, our approach to coaching becomes one of two things. It's either how we ourselves like to be coached, or it's this combination of people who've coached us in the past, the best and the worst, right? To the point of your very first question, I remember before I had any training on how to be a coach, I just remembered all of the coaches that I hated, and I wanted to do the opposite of what they did. And that was my coaching style, was not what they did. I think there are a few things that are really important with understanding coaching, and I do think this is so often training and development at the supervisor, manager, and beyond is overlooked. And the further you grow in an organization, the less and less time is often spent in professional development, outside of going to conferences, or maybe if you yourself are hiring an executive coach, right? Often that's not the case. And so I believe that the best investment for a new supervisor or manager is in formal training on how to be a coach. In terms of coaching models, there's a lot of different types of models out there. And I'll be honest, over the years, I've used different coaching models for different teams. I think first and foremost, it's important to identify one. And there's, again, you just go do a web search right now for coaching models and just pick one of them. Pick one and apply it across the team, because what happens is, does a few things. One, every coach in an organization or in a department now have the same framework of what happens in a coaching session. That's the first part about what a coaching model does. It defines what happens in the course of a coaching session. It looks at how is coaching delivered? It talks about what does the person who's being coached, how should they prepare? What do they bring to the session? And for the coach, how should they prepare? And what do they bring to the session? It defines clearly how do we get consensus on what the most important aspect was, and what do we do moving forward from here? One of the most simple models I've seen is even just 3 questions, right? It's like, what did you do well? What did you improve? Right? It's like that. It could be a start, stop, continue. There's one called SAFE. There's, again, so many out there. To me, really clear. We go in. What is expected of the coaching conversation? How does the coach prepare? How does the person being coached prepare? What are the outcomes of that session? High level, that's really important. The second piece that if you think about how do you crawl, walk, run this thing, I think the very first part is get a coaching model into place and get people accustomed to using the coaching model. The second piece now is having someone who's actually coaching the coaches and having a process. And this is actually when I think about, again, from contact centers, there's something called calibration, which is when you're listening to calls and, hey, would we score this call the same way? I believe having someone to lead coaching calibration sessions and say, hey, based off of this piece with, this thing that happened with Russel, and coaching isn't just about, replacing a behavior that we want to see, improved or modified. It's also about how do we reinforce the good things, right? So it's have a coaching model in place. The second piece is having someone who is able to help calibrate and coach and develop the coaches. And then the third piece of it for me is like, and this is really where you're running is, now you start to develop a library and an index of all of these coaching situations and outcomes, so that if I'm brand new to the organization, I don't just understand, hey, here's our coaching model and here's how I'm going to be developed and continually, groomed as a coach. But now, hey, say I have an instance that for the very first time, I've never had an employee who just totally ripped into a customer. And I'm a new coach and I'm not sure how I might coach that situation. Well, if you're now at this like highest level of having a coaching repository, and I can say, hey, let me look at all the times when employees struggled with this exact issue. And let me look at all of the examples of the type of coaching feedback that was provided. And let me look at all of the examples of what was then the time to proficiency or the future, kind of outcomes based off of that. I mean, that level of sophistication and resourcing, can have profound impacts.
Do you approach it differently, individuals versus teams? I mean, a team can be apathetic, even if it's just an individual that's influenced it, but it can grow. So is there a different way of looking at it in that way, or no?
So yes and no. I think it still comes down to the individual level. And if we think about why are people doing what they're doing, right? There's the common example of, hey, people don't do things for, one of 3 reasons. They don't know how to do it. They know how to do it, but they don't know why it matters, or they know how to do it, why it matters, and they just don't care. So in your example, you said, hey, team is often influenced by an individual. My first focus is on the individual, right? If I want to get the team is only as strong as that person. So I think it does matter at an individual level, is like understanding that. Now that said, I think when we think about casting vision for our team, when we think about, especially if we've got environments where there are a lot of dependencies on each other, I think there's a lot that can be done to coach and develop and inspire and motivate at the team level. But I think about, my one son is a soccer player, and for as often as they have practice as a team, they also recognize that if they're not doing goalie training, if they're not doing defender training, if they're not doing finishing training, right? If they're not focused on those players or those areas, the team will only get to a certain level. And so while yes, Russell, I think there, of course, is work that needs to be done at the team level. I think if it's a matter of somebody's driving apathy, which it's always going to stem to an individual or individuals, that improvement has to be done at the individual level.
So let's talk about that improvement, Justin. How do you know you're successful as a leader if you're trying to combat this apathy thing? How do you know the needle's been put in another direction.
Yeah.
For lack of a horrible metaphor.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in how you know it when you see it. And Russell, I measure my work towards success in one of two ways. And I think about it in terms of predictive and reflective measures. Predictive things are what can I do in advance of this desired outcome? And, you know, my desired outcome in terms of apathy part of it might be thinking about customer satisfaction rates. It might be looking at retention, but it also might be looking at people who are exhibiting discretionary effort. You know, I think about the employee who one day came to me and said, Justin, I know we had that thing happen yesterday. Last night after dinner, I was like just thinking about it, and I believe that I've got an idea that'll help us. Right? There aren't many balanced scorecards or whatever that have like ideas thought about at dinner or in the shower and brought to the office the next day. But those to me are the indicators of people who are like starting to really like get it in there and get reignited and excited and engaged in what's happening here. I always focus on the predictive things because I believe if I focus on the predictive things and I've got the right predictive things, then I'm going to get the right outcomes. So for me, one of my measures of success is, am I or are my leaders, are they spending time in one-on-one coaching? And it's not just about are they spending the time, but what's happening in those coaching sessions. It's understanding like, hey, have we identified really good opportunities to collect feedback from our employees? Have we put really good mechanisms for talking about what we're working on, right? If I understand what is driving apathy, I can create really good measures to identify, address, and prevent it from happening in the future. And then my reflective measures, those are all the things that now it's too late, right? That's going back and saying, okay, well, you know, we had 6 people churn this past month, or, you know, we had to have a conversation with Russell, and even though he hasn't quit yet, like it's really clear that he's there. So like, there's not one set of metrics, but I think it's if you understand what is driving apathy today, the first place is what are the predictive things that you can do and measure and look at to better understand, address, and overcome those things in the first place.
You talked off the top about values, and I often recommend and suggest myself that vision and mission are one of the most integral communication tools in an organization to help with motivation. Where does purpose, values, mission, and those values have a role in an apathy conversation?
There's like there's 4 dimensions of kind of employee growth, and I'm forgetting about like the actual name for this, but it's it kind of progresses like this, Russell. The first question employees ask when they join an organization is, what do I get? Right? What do I get from the organization? And this goes to some of the other things we talked about in terms of like pay, hours, benefits, whatever. The second part is, what can I give? And this is really understanding like, do my skills, passions, ability line up with my ability to drive impact here? Kind of the third level of maturity is this idea of, do I belong? And that is this connection of like, do I feel connection to a greater purpose? Do I see like this being like my tribe and my people? And then the fourth to me, which is like the real ideal here with engagement, is how can we grow? And this is now thinking about beyond self, how can the organization that I'm a part of be successful? Where what I think is interesting, Russell, is a lot of people join businesses because they maybe are fans of the product, they're fans of the brand, they're fans of the mission, they're fans of the values. Those are all things that get us really interested in what this company says they're about. But then I asked the question of like, how do they show up, and how do I get connected to those in my everyday? And the hard answer is that in a lot of organizations, I don't. I see it in our manual or on the back of my name badge. It might show up in our annual review process, right? Often annual reviews try to have the core values of the business. And then if I'm a manager, and I see this, I'm now reverse engineering and I'm like, okay, what are all of the things that Russell did this year that make him have a selfless spirit of service? Well, I remember this one. We're trying to manufacture this versus the approach that I mentioned at Hershey, where we said instead of it being something that we look back on, how's it something that we're moving to every day? And this to me becomes that sense of purpose. It's recognizing that, Russell, you joined this organization because you believe in the cause. And so how do I every single day reinforce the fact that you are making a difference on the cause?
So let's flip the mirror around, Justin, because as leaders, we feel apathy in a lot of our organizations within it. And maybe we don't have the best leader to help us through our apathy. It just washed over us, whether we like it or not. So as leaders, how do you think we need to step up and get motivated, engaged, even if we're doing mundane tasks?
I will speak for myself first. I think part of it, Russell, is having a network and a group of people that we invite into accountability. I think it's really recognizing the influence and the impact that we have on the people we serve and the organizations we're a part of. And again, I think about examples of like my older son and things he did, and my younger son, like I watch him like parroting those things because he respects him and he admires him. And whether employees respect and admire you or not, like all eyes, if you're a leader, all eyes are always on you and what you're doing. So I think the first part for me is like, it's being really intentional every day to wake up and recognize like this is an opportunity and a responsibility, and are we going to be good stewards of it or not? And recognizing that we cannot do that alone. And you may not have the best boss, but do you have a peer or someone else in your organization that can hold you accountable, or that can be a sounding board, or that can be a mentor? Do you have someone outside of your organization? And sometimes like the lines blur between people who are friends or people who are old bosses or old colleagues. But that to me is like, I know if a leader holds their role with the respect and honor that it needs, like that to me is evident. And it's also evident if they are inviting others in to hold them accountable and keep them in check. Because our own worst enemy is supervisor, manager, director, VP, I don't care what you are or not, is our own stinking thinking. And so what can we do to make sure that we've got people in our lives to protect us from that? That to me is it. Like, for the rest of your life, people are going to make decisions that you don't agree with. And you, like, actually give you a mantra that a former mentor gave to me, and it was this idea of care deeply, fight passionately, and hold loosely. And I think how do leaders get past this idea of apathy? Like, if you really love your job and the organization you're a part of, know that there are going to be tough decisions. And it's easy for us to like get inside of all the things we would have wished or wanted to do differently. But can we get back to this place of like, do you care deeply about what you're doing and what you're going after and the opportunity you have? Are you willing to fight passionately for what you believe is right and your perspective? But at the end of the day, will you hold loosely to know that if you're part of an organization, like there are many variables at play that you do and don't know. To the best idea may not be your idea, or the thing that's right for right now, you won't always agree with. That to me, it's a posture, it's a way of thinking, and again, it's having people keep us in check.
For me, I've also found it to be really motivating with change. I think a lot of people, for apathy for themselves, is they're in a role, regardless of how much successful they see or how much success they see the impact, they're bored because it's the same job they've been doing for far too long. But the minute they get a new responsibility, a new opportunity within the organization, that switch happens where they've got something new bone to chew on, and they get to use their brain in a new way. And I felt that for myself in the organizations I've worked with, that's always been a big trigger for me of going, oh, I am more than that role. I can do other things too. And to get the opportunity to do that, not only for myself to find those opportunities, but for leaders to see going, oh, they'd be great for this.
Absolutely.
That's always been a big opportunity for me for apathy fighting.
Yeah, I love it.
When is apathy gone too far? I want to wrap up with this. Is there a point where either for yourself or for an individual you're coaching and mentoring, where apathy's like, you know what? This ship has sailed. There's no, like, what is the tipping point where it's just sort of like, maybe you need to go somewhere else. Maybe we need to let you go.
Yeah.
Or maybe I need to quit.
I wish there was just one thing here. This is why I'm like, probably there are human resource individuals right now who are not going to like what I'm going to say here, but
perfect.
But to me, there's this like this gut moment of like recognizing, knowing that their heart or your heart isn't in it anymore. That to me is the moment. And that can show up through conversations. It can show up, to me, there's this connection between what we value, and this is not just in terms of like where we find significance and what we believe is important, but this is like even our core ethos. Like, what is it that we as a human being stand for and believe in and want to contribute to, right? So there's like that consideration for all of us. There's this then layer where we think about our skills and passions and ability, and what is our ability to drive and to contribute change toward whatever that thing is, right? And then there's this third part of, and do we believe that we are supported and resourced in the way where that is possible? And my observation has been that if one of those is at risk, you have great opportunity to kind of restore and redeem like that person and get them on the right path. And so if I'm like, this is aligned with what I believe in and I have the right tools, but I don't think I'm good enough, like we can work through that, right? If it's like, I think I'm good enough and I have the right tools, but is this really what I believe? Well, we can work through figuring that out, or it's, I believe this, I'm good enough, but do I have the right tools, right? All of those are solvable problems. Once you start to have two of those, now to me is at the place where I'm probably going to lose you. And the minute then that I've recognized that all three are gone, like that to me is the true point of no return, where it's like, this no longer aligns with what I believe, where I think my skills are best suited, and having the resources to do what needs to be done anyway. That to me is the point of no return. But honestly, it's like, if I've lost you on two of those, or if I myself lost on two of those, it's probably time to find something else.
Thank you, Justin. Now I got to ask you the last question, which is what I ask everyone, which is, what's one simple action right now people can do to improve their relationships at work?
To me, Russell, it is to be proactive in not just connecting with people, but being genuinely curious about who they are and what they show up for every single day. The more curiosity we have around like the people we're with and what really brings them to be their best self at work, man, that is such just powerful information, and I think can enable us to accomplish a lot together.
I love that. Thank you very much, Justin. It's nice for me to ask you the questions this time. Last time you were the facilitator, and this time I got to pepper you, sir. That is Justin Robbins. He's a keynote speaker and founder and principal analyst at Metric Sherpa. Thanks so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Russell.
And that'll do it for another episode of Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. I'm Russell Lolliker. As always, I really appreciate your time and your brain power to take on new thoughts, new ways of thinking. Also, as I mentioned off the top, if you haven't had a chance, great resource, raw notes. Just go over to my website, relationshipsatwork.ca. And at the top, you'll see employee interviews. You click on that, follow all the instructions, and you will have a brand spanking new raw note every Thursday morning in your inbox to maybe help you think a little bit differently or reinforce the thoughts that you're already focused on. Either way, really useful. You have a great day. Take care.